Hi, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to answer a question that I get a lot, and it's when do I use my RRSP or my TFSA? We'll go into the differences between the two. I'll show some taxation examples. I'll run a projection from my age 36 to 65, prioritizing the RRSP versus prioritizing the TFSA. What will my net worth look like differently in those two scenarios? And then I'll even run a retirement projection based on that, and we'll see the estate outcome on both of those examples. So let's get started. So if you've been here before, you know I'm a huge fan of the TFSA or the tax-free savings account. I think it's the best type of account that we have access to as Canadians. However, I do hate the name. I think the name has done it a great injustice. It should be the TFIA because the TFSA should absolutely be used as an investment account. Too many people out there are using it as a savings account. The biggest strength of the TFSA is if you put money in and it grows substantially over time, you do not pay anything on the way out, which leads me to some of the differences between the two types of accounts. Like I said, the TFSA, you put money in, you can take it out at any time, it's tax-free. You do not get a tax refund when you put money into the TFSA, which is the main advantage and the main draw really of the RRSP. With an RRSP, if you're putting money in, you are getting a refund back to yourself come tax time. And then if you invest that money in something like a TFSA, it can really compound and make a real positive difference there. What lots of people forget though is that on the way out of an RRSP, you will be paying taxes. So sometimes it comes down to running some break-even math. If the question you're asking next is which of these is best for you, the reality is the answer is it depends. And it depends on a myriad of different questions. And so one of the things, just to make sure we're on the same page, is when you're putting $1 into an RRSP, it's as if, for tax purposes, you have earned $1 less and you'll get that as a refund. So for the remainder of this video, I'm going to assume that I'm a single person my age in Ontario. I'm going to assume I'm making $90,000, and I'm going to assume that my expectation in retirement in today's dollars is that I'll be pulling about $60,000 of income in retirement. So based on these assumptions, if I go to Ernst & Young's website and I look at the marginal tax rate right now at $90,000 in Ontario, I'm at 29.65%, meaning that if I put $1 into an RRSP, I will get 29.65 cents back on the dollar. What's also nice is that at this particular income, that marginal tax bracket starts around $55,000, which means I can put up to $35,000, assuming I have the room, into RRSPs all within that 29.65% bracket. Beyond that, then I drop into another bracket, but I have lots and lots of space there. In retirement, however, I want to be looking at the average tax rate. So when you're working and putting money away, you're looking at your marginal tax rate because that's what you'll be getting as a refund. But in retirement, you should be looking at your average tax rate. So this leads me to one of my first points. The time that you want to be using your RRSP is when your marginal tax rate today is at least 10 to 15% larger than your expected average tax rate in retirement, assuming that the brackets of today and the spending in today's dollars. So let's look at this a little bit further. Just to reiterate, at $90,000 in Ontario, my marginal tax rate is 29.65%. If I'm expecting a $60,000 income, again, this is in today's dollars, but remember, yes, that $60,000 will inflate over time and be a larger number, but so will the brackets. So it is reasonable to expect that the brackets will be somewhat similar to today's world. Of course, we cannot predict what the tax brackets will do long term. There could be massive changes, we don't know that. But we can, based on what we've seen historically and how our system is set up, we can assume that whatever $60,000 is today will inflate, and so will the bracket along with it. Meaning that in Ontario, my average tax rate at $60,000 is 16.04%. It's a 13.6% advantage going into my RRSP in terms of the taxation. That is a big win. So let's follow the journey of $100 given the 3 different options you can really take when it comes to RRSP versus TFSA. Option 1, you invest in the RRSP, $100, you get your $29.60 refund and you invest that in a TFSA. Option 2 is that you put all of that money into a TFSA. Option 3 is that you put it just into an RRSP and then you spend the refund on something in the short term. So in all 3 cases, your cash out of pocket is the same, but in option A, you actually have invested $29.60 more than all the other options. And here's how the numbers break down. After 30 years at 5%, for my example here, in option A, your RRSP has grown to $432.19. Your TFSA has grown to $127.93. Now, reminder, you need to take tax into consideration when you're taking out of the RRSP. So to get that money out, assuming a 16% average tax rate, you'd be looking at $363.04 from the RRSP of cash in hand, plus the $127 of TFSA money, meaning that you have $490 and change in your hand following option A. If you did just pure TFSA after the 30 years, it also would have grown to the same $432. And an RRSP would have done the exact same thing, but again, taxation's factored in. So the cash in your hand 30 years from now is $363. So when it comes to an investment prioritization in terms of cash in hand 30 years from now, it's not surprising to see that RRSP plus investing the difference is the clear winner because you've invested the most amount of money. It should win even when tax are considered. But once taxation is considered, when you're comparing purely RRSP to TFSA, given these brackets and the numbers that I'm using, the TFSA actually nets you the most amount of money in your hand, which is why I said earlier, you should really be looking at only using the RRSP when your marginal tax rate today has a pretty significant gap over your average tax rate in the future. All right, so let's jump into my software here. And again, I'm using myself as an example, 36 years old. Here are the assumptions that I'm following. I have a $40,000 TFSA as of right now. I have a $40,000 RRSP as of right now. I'm making about $80,000 to $90,000 in Ontario, so I'm maxing out my CPP, so that'll be even in the 2 different projections. And what I'm going to compare is in scenario A, I'm prioritizing the RRSP. So I'm maxing it out every year for the rest of my career, all the way to age 64. I retire at 65. In option B, I prioritize the TFSA, but I'm investing the exact same amount of money between the 2 scenarios. Once my TFSA is caught up and I don't have enough room to put what I would be doing into the RRSP, I then break it between the 2 types of accounts. So I max out the TFSA and then the remainder goes into the RRSP. Let's look at the outcome. So we'll start here in the scenario where it's focused all on the RRSP. Again, I turn 36 in this year. I'll retire at the end of the year that I turn 65. I start this year with $40,000 in both the TFSA and the RRSP, but I'm exclusively contributing to the RRSP. As you can see here, $0 going into the tax-free savings account, or the better name TFIA. At the end of my career, I turn 64, I retire at the end of the year. I have $164,645 in tax-free savings. Fantastic. I also have $1,327,540 in my RRSP. That is absolutely great. Total of $1,492,186 between the 2 accounts, which is great. But let's go and look at the TFSA scenario. So here we are in the scenario where I'm prioritizing the tax-free savings account. So what I'm doing is I'm investing the exact same dollar figure as in scenario A. It's just that for the first 5-6 years, I'm prioritizing it 100% into the TFSA. Once I catch up on my room, Then I'm doing my full TFSA contribution, and then the remainder goes into the TFSA. And this is going to be assuming what we're projecting as TFSA room down the road. Of course, it could be slightly different. But again, it's just based on those projections. In the end, instead of being very, very heavily weighted to the RRSP, Chad Chadster in this example here has $892,662 in tax-free savings accounts. Yes, please. That sounds fantastic. Along with $604,852 in his RRSP. The total net worth between those two accounts is $1,497,514. It's about a $5,000 difference to scenario A, which is more than likely just a rounding error between the software not showing me the pennies in the RSP contributions on scenario A and me just not being able to see that and just rounding the numbers. So it's just, I'm going to call those even though there's about a $5,000 difference. So how does this affect the output for Chad Chadster in his retirement? Let's look at that, but we're going to start again in the RRSP focused scenario. So just a reminder, I was anticipating taking about a $60,000 income, which is the wording I used earlier in the video. I more so meant to say about a $60,000 spend, which those things are not the same. This is after tax spending. So there's a little bit of a caveat to what I said a little bit earlier. I apologize for that. And I haven't done any planning in here in terms of withdrawal order or CPP planning or anything like that. I just put it in here and I wanted to see just a raw comparison with all other assumptions being the same. So in the all RRSP scenario, again, just a reminder, about 90% of the net worth is tied up in RSP, which means it's taxable. About 90% of my income sources are going to be taxable, and then I have this little TFSA off to the side. Spending $60,000 a year in today's dollars, which by the time I turn 65 will have inflated to $122,000 already, means that I start running into shortfalls around age 86, which is not too bad. That's pretty late in life to be looking at that. And again, I haven't done any planning. And in reality, I know I'm not going to keep my spending that static into my 70s and 80s. So this is looking not too bad at all. But you can see down here, my estate before taxes will end up being negative $559,148, all because of these last 5-6 years. Again, I can probably plan around that. There's a bunch of things in here that are making this a little bit worse than what reality will be. In the other scenario, literally the only change I made was prioritizing the TFSA in early years and doing a mix between the two, which is definitely the way I would recommend going. In this case, again, everything stays the same. It's just that instead of having 90% of my income sources be taxable, I have a much more even distribution. It's more like, when you factor in CPP and OAS, it's more probably like a 50-50 distribution between taxable income sources and tax-free income sources, meaning that it's way more efficient to get this money out. And when I scroll down, I don't run into any shortfalls in this scenario. And in fact, my estate now is worth, before tax, $338,000 to the positive. It's over a $800,000 positive swing to my estate by one shift in mindset back when I'm 36, which I am right now. So this is, again, where we talk about like which one to do. I am not saying that the RSP isn't good. I love RSPs, but only when you are making a much higher marginal tax rate than you expect to be paying in the future. Again, let's look at this just one more time. Here, 29.65% marginal tax rate, which is what we're talking about. And based on this assumption, my effective average tax rate, there's a few years where it's very low because I'm purely leaning on the TFSA, but it's in that 12, 19, 18% range. It kind of fluctuates a little bit, but it's a big advantage to do it that way. So I'm a fan of both types of accounts. I love the TFSA so much. It brings so much flexibility. So if it's time for us to start looking at your financial plan, your RSPs, your TFSAs, or which one makes the most sense for you, there'll be a link in the description down below that'll come directly to me. Until next time, keep planning.